And actually, while we're waiting for people to join, since this is a community, please put your name in the chat and say hello and tell us where you're coming in from. Who's out there in this community gathering today, and where are you beaming in from to be part of this circle, this community, this joyous event in a time that needs more joyous events? Old friends, new friends. Hi, everybody. You can see each other in the chat. New Mexico, Florida, Pennsylvania, Coyote, Denmark, Sunnyvale, Michigan. Excellent. Thank you. While we're gathering, I'm going to encourage you to put yourself in gallery view. If you don't know how to do that, that's a toggle on the upper right-hand side of your black screen. And just get a sense of who's here. You can use the triangles on the left and the right side to go through different screens and see all the beautiful people in this community who are gathered to learn from Melissa Nelson and to be with each other today. Thank you so much for being here. If you're out there lurking, if you can, maybe put on your video just for a minute so we can see each other's faces. If you can't or don't want to, that's fine too. But just in the beginning, it's kind of fun to see everybody's smiling faces out there. Excellent. Thank you. Good to see you all. Valeria, Janine, welcome. Yeah. Hi, everybody. Great. And just to let you know, the chat will be shared. So if you are writing in the chat, in a sense, you're giving your consent to be part of our record for this. And we are happy to have you there. And we'll keep the chat open through the course of the conversation. So if you have things you want to add or comments or questions for each other, you can use that chat. I am Toby Hertzlick. I am hosting you on this Zoom call from Santa Fe, New Mexico, which is the traditional lands of the Tewa and Tewa people, the Pueblo peoples of the Southwest, the traditional lands and the ongoing lands. So I want to recognize and give thanks to those folks who have stewarded and taken care of this place for so long. And also to the indigenous peoples who have stewarded and taken care of the places where you are residing and beaming in from on Turtle Island, on this planet Earth. Let's recognize that. I also want to introduce my dear friend and beloved colleague and wonderful soul sister and teacher, Melissa Nelson. Melissa, will you say hi so we're sure that you're on people's front screen?
Yes,
here?
Hello, greetings relatives. Hi from the four directions. Good to see you all. I'm really honored to be here with you.
And I'm going to encourage you who are watching to actually pin Melissa on your first screen. So you always can have her in front of you. And you do that by going to the little three dots. If you put your cursor on her picture and go to the three dots, you can select pin to first screen. And then you get to see Melissa in the bigger view. So Melissa, many of you know Melissa deeply. Many of you are just meeting her for the first time. Melissa is a proud member of the Turtle Mountain Chippewa tribe, also sometimes known as the Ojibwe people. And she's half Norwegian. She's a professor of Indigenous Sustainability at Arizona State University, coming off of a long career also at San Francisco State University. She's the board chair and the former director of the Cultural Conservancy, which is a 35-year-old organization that has been preserving and protecting Indigenous and Native cultures from around the world, and recently has been gifted a farm upon which the Cultural Conservancy folks are revitalizing traditional Indigenous foodways. So Melissa has her hands in a lot of different pots. She and I are soul sisters. We're fellow Banana Slugs alumni from UC Santa Cruz. I can't even remember when we met, but Melissa, anything you want to add to your introduction? Anything you want to say in greeting?
No, thank you. That was pretty thorough, Toby. Thank you. I'm sure it'll unfold all the different ways that I interact with the wild, wonderful world at this time.
Perfect. I also want to introduce you to Jennifer Gardner, who is doing tech support for us. If you're having any problems or you need kind of a back conversation while Melissa and I are in dialogue, and then later when we invite you into the dialogue as well, you can private chat Jennifer, and she can take care of you and help you out. So very briefly, our purpose today is to introduce Melissa's book to this community, the book Traditional Ecological Knowledge, we're both holding it, um, Learning from Indigenous Practices for Environmental Sustainability, which Melissa edited along with Dan Schilling. And we also have a sneak preview of a brand new book that's hot off the press today that we'll tell you about a little bit later in this call. This is, I think, our fourth episode in the Voices of Nature Biomimicry for Social Innovation author series. And the purpose of this is to really crowd support new ideas that are emerging into the world from women authors who are speaking on behalf of the intelligence of the natural world and gathering the voices of others who are doing the same. It's such an important and transformative time, and we need the wisdom of nature. And so I learned how hard it is as authors to get your book out there. It's a big part of your responsibility. And I thought, well, Biomimicry for Social Innovation can help with that. Let's gather communities to welcome new books into the world and buy them and pass them around and get that wisdom out there. So this is in partnership with Women Leading Change with some support from the Nova Foundation. So gratitude to both of those as well. Melissa, anything you want to say about why you said yes to this? You're very busy. You've got your hands in many, many responsibilities. And why did you say yes?
I said yes because it came from you, Toby, and I love everything that you do as my soul sister. And I also wanted an opportunity to really highlight the incredible voices and wisdom in this book that I don't think has really gotten its fair due yet. And it's perennial wisdom and any opportunity to talk with folks who are interested in Native people's knowledge, ecological knowledge, and sustainability. I love conversing with folks about these timely and critically important issues. So I welcomed this opportunity. So thank you for the invitation, Toby.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for saying yes. So Melissa, we are here to talk about your book, but I want to start by talking about you. As I mentioned, you're a professor and also executive president, now board chair of a very active nonprofit. You're also an ecologist and someone involved in cultural restoration. You're Native and Norwegian. So there are many ways in which you are a bridge person in this world. And I wonder if you can speak to that a little bit. Tell us about how you walk and weave among these different perspectives and how it's shaped you in your leadership.
Thank you, Toby, for the great question. And again, great to see old friends and new friends and relatives on this call. I first want to acknowledge the first people on whose land I live and work on. The coastal Miwok people recognizes the Federated Indians of Great and Rancheria, a sovereign nation based in the Santa Rosa area, for those of you outside. I was born in Chochenyo Ohlone territory, known as the East Bay of the San Francisco Bay Area in California, and then raised up in Yuki and Wailaki territory in Mendocino County, up in the wild lost coast of Northern California. So I just wanted to give my personal lineage of where I grew up. As Toby mentioned, my parents and my ancestors all come from really North Dakota for the last few generations, many generations in the Turtle Mountains. My mom has Ojibwe or Chippewa or Anishinaabe and Cree and French, the Métis people from Canada. And then my father, Norwegian, in a farming community. And so I just want to always honor my ancestors for giving me life and allowing me to be here. And also all the incredible Native California Indian people who I've had a chance to learn from and be of service to here in this beautiful area we call California today. And I guess having that diverse background, like many people do, I early on had to embrace multiple ways of perceiving the world. My mom and dad saw the world very differently and had very different backgrounds, but came together. And so early on, I really saw the colonial impacts on Native peoples with reservation communities and my Native family. and the farming family. And so I just saw that we are so diverse, and it's very important to have an open mind and be able to build bridges between different ways of knowing and being and thinking and working. So that's really a critical part of it. Also, I think my mom named me well. My name Melissa is a Greek name that means honeybee, which is a pollinator. And I really see myself as a cross pollinator. Just naturally, I came out that way. I love, kind of mixing pollen and moving around with different communities and different ways of being and different knowledge systems. So it just came naturally to me. I would say the third thing is that I grew up in a very small town, tiny, like 200 people. My graduating class was 8, which was actually a big class for my school. The previous couple classes were 2 and 4. So you had to get along with everyone, whether you liked them or not, whether you shared the same value system or not. You just had to get along. When the road washes out, you need your neighbor to come, pull you out. And when the fires come, and we lived up there very rurally, so things would happen like that, storms and uh, a lot of like what we're starting to see now with climate change, increased natural disasters with erosion and no power for weeks at a time and no access to grocery stores and things like that. So when you grow up in a small town like that, I think you learn to get along with many different kinds of people. And that just helped also in terms of being open to different things. And then I always had such a love of the natural world, which really raised me. The South Fork of the Eel River and the mountains and the salmon and the otters that played in the river, and the beautiful ancient redwood trees, 300 feet tall. And so really being free to roam about safely in that natural environment as a child was just such a gift. I realize now what a profound gift that was for me and my brother, and the way my parents raised us there, very kind of back to the land. So I had a love of biology very early on, and photosynthesis and science and geology, and really kind of the overarching natural history, how plants worked, how animals worked, connection to the stars and the turning of the planets. And so that led me into the study of sciences. Yeah. And, but very quickly on, I went from a graduating class of 8 in Leggett Valley High School to biology classes of 400 at UC Santa Barbara. And it was like, and everyone there was kind of into pre-med. They wanted to be like wealthy doctors, which was completely different than what I wanted to love nature and love the earth and protect the earth and be a better caretaker of the earth. And so I quickly kind of I went through a biology degree, but gravitated towards environmental studies and Native American studies, religious studies, because I also saw that nature didn't have a problem on its own. It got along really well. Its problem was humans. And the way some humans, not all humans, were exploiting her, Mother Earth. And so I realized it was all about human values and human behavior that I really wanted to focus on learning more about. Yeah, so that's where I shifted more into, I guess you would say, the humanities or the social sciences, and being of service to indigenous communities wherever I was, to learn directly from the local Native people about what their environmental priorities and concerns were.
Mhm. Thank you. Thank you for sharing how your own way of being locally attuned in the place where you grew up and in the places where you went to really informed how you are um, midwifing and curating others in their relationship with place. And I think in this book, um, as you're talking about being a cross pollinator and a honeybee who connects different voices and different sources of life, this book is really a cross pollination itself. right?
Mm.
You could say this is all indigenous knowledge, but as we know, there are many, many different tribes, many different communities, many different places that have knowledge that comes forward into this assortment, not assortment, this synthesis of what we call traditional ecological knowledge. So can you talk a little bit about what is traditional ecological knowledge
Mhm.
and what
How long has it been?
what is your what was your goal in curating this collection of voices?
Mhm. Thank you. Well, as I mentioned, I also did kind of a dual education, formal higher education in universities, but community-based education on the ground with a lot of elders and Native communities. And so that oral knowledge that's passed down through stories and songs and ways of being and practicing culture on the land, very little of that is documented well. It's documented by, outside anthropologists and ethnographers, often in a not good way. That's a whole other story. But the stories of environmental knowledge that I was hearing on the ground by basket weavers and traditional fisher people and forest people and farmers and seed keepers was so profound and different than what I was hearing in that biology class, that 400 level pre-med biology class. So I quickly sought out as many indigenous elders as I could to really learn more about what we now call traditional ecological knowledge. And it's a bit of a buzzword, it's important, and it's getting some cachet in higher education. And we have our own acronym, which is a sign of success in academia, right? TEK. But there are many critics of it too, for good reason, right? Because it removes indigenous peoples. It focuses on the knowledge without the people, and the knowledge doesn't live in a vacuum. The knowledge lives with the people and the culture and the land-based practices. So I really want to make that point. We often talk also about indigenous knowledge systems because they're systems tied to language, they're systems tied to history, they're systems tied to economics, how you eat, how you feed yourself, how you clothe yourself, how you house yourself. So for us, the indigenous knowledge systems are much more holistic. And then there's like native sciences, plural, underneath that. And then really underneath that is TEK, which has become identified as indigenous knowledge and practices tied to ecological processes, and really time-tested, intergenerational practices such as basket weaving, such as fishing, such as hunting buffalo, such as making traditional structures, whether it's an igloo in the Arctic or it's a roundhouse in California or a longhouse in the Mohawk territory, or a teepee of the Lakota. All of those traditional ways of creating culture come directly from the land, or what we often call biodiversity, and the uniqueness of ecosystems. So there's really not one pure definition of TEK because of the diversity of indigenous peoples in the world and the diversity of Native American tribes in the US, over 500 nations. But generally it's the knowledge, wisdom, and practices, right, that are encoded in oral traditions that talk about a different way of being and interacting with the environment, knowing that it's about participation, not so-called distant observation like Western science is based on. And that's one of the biggest differences, because even to talk about nature separate from us is a little silly, right? We are nature. We're an animal. Whether we pretend we're not, we are an animal and we are a human being, and we are integrated into these cycles of nature with every breath we take, with every sip of water we have, with every exhale, with every food we eat. And so to put ourselves back into that web of life again, which Western science has kind of extracted us out as somehow separate or above the rest of the natural world. So TEK honors and recognizes us as, kind of a plain member, a citizen of all of our kin, the winged ones, the finned ones, the four-leggeds, the furred, the scaled. We are just one other member of that grand society of nature.
Beautiful. And when we spoke last week, I remember you saying that in indigenous traditions, knowledge is a process more than a thing.
Yes, yes. For our Anishinaabe traditions and based on the Algonquian language root, which is like Blackfoot, Cree, so many Cheyenne, we are very verb-based. According to some, our language is like 70% verbs and 30% nouns, whereas English is about the opposite, like 70 or 80% nouns, things, and like 30% verbs. And so a lot of indigenous languages are about flow and movement and cycles and dynamics and flux more than about things. And so we honor that flow of movement. Everything is about movement. And I think, quantum physics is getting to that. I think some ecosystem theories are getting to that. I think biomimicry honors that. So I think Western science is also coming to understand that it's about those flows and dynamics more than it's about things. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. There's a quote from Robin Wall Kimmerer, who's got an essay, a wonderful essay in this book. And I know many folks in this audience probably know Robin. I know she's a close friend of yours, but one of the things I flagged was, she said, this orientation to the world as an ongoing gift exchange between the human and more than human world is foundational in indigenous environmental philosophy. This philosophy acknowledges that our human lives are utterly dependent on the lives of other beings, and thus our first responsibility is for gratitude.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Such a powerful teaching, and her chapter is just extraordinary, very nuanced and very also accessible. And I love how she talks about cultures of gratitude lead to cultures of reciprocity.
Mm-hmm.
And to really honor and recognize, the gifts of life every day. And so it's a philosophical and a spiritual understanding that TEK is deeply embedded with, in terms of understanding that life gives us gifts every day that we just often, in modern America and other parts of the world, just take for granted. We turn on a faucet, there's water. We flip a switch and there's light. We hop in our car, we could go anywhere, we put gas in our, cars, and we don't recognize the hidden costs to the earth and the actual impacts of all of that. Whereas somehow indigenous peoples have really retained this understanding of the limits of nature. You cannot just keep taking from something without giving back, because you'll kill whatever you're doing, and it's dehumanized Mother Earth and dehumanized non-human nature in a way that's been so destructive and have led us to this precipice that we're in right now. Whereas if you honor and recognize all of life as a gift, which I think many spiritual traditions try to, get to as well, right? Many of the world religions try to remind us life is a gift, not to be taken for granted. And I think if we live that way, like my chapter, live as if, the future depended on our kinship with all of life, how important it is to live that way, not just, it's good to believe it and understand it, but we actually have to embody it somehow.
Yes, thank you for pointing that out. And for those of you who will be buying the book, will be reading the book, Melissa's chapter is the conclusion, where she points back to a lot of the voices that have come through, to a lot of the teachings. She summarizes, she synthesizes. And while it is closing the book, it's pointing toward the future. Kinship as if the future mattered. Which points me to one of the things I wanted to ask you, Melissa. It's called traditional ecological knowledge. These are in some ways very deep and ancient teachings that are carried forth in contemporary voices. And now meeting the modern Western contemporary mind. So I'm curious about how you see these teachings can be implemented and put into action and put into practice now. You're already starting to point toward that. And in that way, is there some way you would like the Western mind to be approaching this book?
Whew, that's a meaty question there, Toby. Thank you. It's an uneasy, process, right? There's a lot of tension in trying to embrace these different ways of knowing and being, mainly because of the colonial history, right? That cannot be ignored or denied and must be reckoned with. And that's why there's such a movement for justice today with so many communities of color and indigenous peoples and other marginalized peoples. There has to be a reckoning, certainly in this country, about the past and that colonial exploitive history and ongoing process with extraction of indigenous peoples and environmental injustices with communities of color and urban and rural and different regions. So that really has to be reckoned with. Many people are into healing and moving on without paying attention to the past and really having some kind of repair and reckoning and reparations about the injustices of the past, land theft and all of that. So there has to be some kind of what Willie Ermine, it's referred to in many of our chapters. He's a Cree ethicist from Saskatchewan, beautiful man, and wrote a piece about the ethical space of engagement. And Robin Kimmerer refers to that in her Three Sisters, Corns, Bean, and Squash, a polyculture, not only of plants, a polyculture of worldviews and a polyculture of in knowledge systems. So rather than thinking of integrating indigenous knowledge and Western or Eurocentric knowledges, there really needs to be a better metaphor. And many people talk about weaving them together. I love the idea of a polyculture because each plant or each knowledge system stands in its own integrity, but is symbiotic, comes together as its own, but is reciprocal. It's not about the melting pot of merging together. It's about standing on your own ground and being yourself completely, but also being able to give and share in a reciprocal way. And the Haudenosaunee have the two-row wampum belt also, that is a metaphor for this, of the knowledge systems working parallel, side by side each other, respecting each other, going down the river of life together, but not necessarily trying to interfere or change each other. We all know who's been in relationships or marriages, right? It's very similar, right? You want each individual to be an individual, and you want to be able to give and receive without changing them and forcing people to change. Everyone has to be themselves. So Native folks are very much about individuality in that true kind of sovereign sense. You be your authentic self, and yet you come together in community because we always need each other. And so I think there can be an appropriate some people call it, Sage Henderson, a trans-systemic synthesis, which is a mouthful, different systems coming together, but being themselves, or a knowledge polyculture. And others, Kyle White, have talked about weaving them together. But again, when you weave a braid together, you weave sweetgrass together, each strand is its own strand. It's not blending, but it's coming together in a very harmonious way rather than a dissonant way, to bring in a music metaphor. There's also another two-row wampum. And to go back to the Three Sisters metaphor, Robin Kimmerer talks about how corn should be representing indigenous knowledge, or TEK, because it is solid, strong, reaches for the sky, connected to the earth, connected to the sky, gives beautiful, bountiful corn. And it is the framework from which beans curl around. So she's saying that corn is like the ethical value system that Western science, with its great inquisitive mind, like the beans, very curious, always searching, discovering, splicing, invading. But it needs an ethical framework of corn to weave around and to continue to share its great wisdom with all of the technology and ways that Western science has improved our lives and improved our world in many fabulous ways. And then she talks about squash, the little plant that, keeps moisture in and shade and prevents weeds from coming in. That's the ethical space of engagement that really moderates or keeps this healthy distance of respect between the sovereignty of the different species. And so I think yeah, it's so eloquent. You just got to read her chapter. She goes into it in so much depth. But it is a true knowledge polyculture that I think we need in the world today. And not to reify indigenous knowledge as one thing, right? Indigenous knowledges or Western science, right? We know that geologists are not biologists and physicists are not geneticists. There's not a monolithic Western science and there's not a monolithic indigenous knowledge. So we need to just pay attention to all of those nuances of the ways that the values can be reciprocal and come together to improve the health and well-being of all beings, right? Of all beings.
And what you're talking about, Melissa, with the integrity of indigenous ecological knowledge and the meeting of Western science knowledge, it reminds me also about biological mutualisms and when organisms come together. The best mutualisms, the enduring mutualisms, are the ones that each bring something different.
That's right.
And there has to be a net benefit between both. Both sides have to benefit from that. And there needs to be a readiness to engage. If there's not a readiness, it doesn't happen well, it doesn't endure. And I think that's what maybe we're seeing now with the waking up in the Western mind, that there are land-based cultures that we can learn from. There are communities that have traditionally been marginalized that we can learn from. There is some solid, deep-rooted integrity of knowing that maybe we can bring some humility as we bring our curiosity.
Exactly. Yeah, I think it's such a fertile time for this knowledge polyculture. And to use another metaphor, you brought up bridge building. And, I learned from Dennis Martinez long ago, who is a fabulous contributor to the book and a long-term restoration ecologist, Tohono O'odham in Swedish, also a Skanda Indian like myself. And he is always talks about building bridges. He's been at the forefront of working with like the US Forest Service and the National Park Service and major climate scientists to uplift indigenous ways of knowing and managing lands and waters. And he said to build a good bridge, you have to start on a really strong foundation, right? To reach across a chasm, a river, a gorge, think of the Taos River Gorge, right? Or any of the Golden Gate, like to reach across that chasm, you have to be deeply rooted to build a bridge. And, sadly, what we see now is that a lot of folks who grew up, in our American culture that really took away a lot of the spirit of nature and, in cities without much eco-literacy and longing for that longing for the belonging in nature, but not necessarily feeling supported for it with focus on science and technology and industry, that people are hungry for a more spiritual land-based connection, and yet being cut off from our roots, whatever it is in Europe or Africa or Asia or South America, and being cut off from those roots when people see native culture that has that deeply rooted connection, there's like a seeking out or a searching for it. And some of that is really positive, but a lot of it can be really negative because it's that colonial mindset often of exploiting for me, for personal gain. And so many indigenous peoples are reluctant to share their knowledge because, it's like, they took our land, they took our water, they took our buffalo, now they want to take our knowledge, and they're taking our seeds, and they're taking our splicing our genes through genetic, modification. And so that's really important to remember in building a bridge. When you reach across a chasm, you need to know who you are and be very much rooted in your own traditions. And I've seen in many different circles a group of elders and a group of quote white people, right? And some folks will come up and say, I'm white, I don't have a culture, right? And it's like, of course you do. Everybody has a culture. And then someone else will come in and say, I'm Irish, I'm Jewish, I'm Norwegian. They're like, right on. Like, it's like that, the polyculture, you meet as equals. You don't meet with, to use a Buddhist term, a begging bowl, right? Going and saying like, help me. And that's just a little gentle warning in building these bridges, to be rooted in who you are and to know you're reaching across a chasm. And there's going to be a lot of skepticism about the long-term commitment to a partnership, right? Some folks are oh, I got a 2-year master's degree, I'm going to go in and just boom, get some knowledge and pop out again and pursue my career. That's not the way it works with Indigenous communities. So it's not for the faint of heart, I guess I will say. That if you want to build partnerships and be of service and collaborate, it's a long-term process.
Mm-hmm. You said something earlier, and I remember reading in your chapter, the thing that really stood out for me was the whole idea of traditional ecological knowledge being about reciprocity and relationship, deep relationship with the land, with knowing. And it sounds like you're pointing toward that again, that as Westerners, as modern people, contemporary Eurocentric folks, as we are interested and curious and want to know about traditional ecological knowledge, coming with that sense of relationship, of reciprocity, of responsibility, of knowledge being processed, not a thing that we can grab and hold and now I own it. It's a different orientation of humility.
Absolutely. Yes, yes.
And I think that's very similar to what we learn and practice in biomimicry. One of the first things that Janine Benyus, who I think is on this call, said to me was, listen without hunting for the next sound. Can we come with that kind of openness? Can we come with that kind of humility? Can we quiet our human/Western cleverness as we come to not consume, but to learn from the teachings in this book?
That's right. And that's why, I work in higher education and in nonprofits, because there are two different modes for decolonizing the way we learn, right? In a university versus on the ground, and really reorienting the way we learn and getting back to the roots of how we learn as human beings, right? This idea that you sit in a classroom 8 hours a day, reading books or looking at one person write things on a board, it's just so antithetical to how many of us learn, right? People are musical. They learn through, like you said, listening or touching things. You've got to be doing something with your hands. People like to write or draw. People have to move their bodies and get up and lift things and move around. And that kind of embodied learning is so essential and in part of TEK, part of Indigenous ways of knowing and learning, that is so different from this brain in a vat, sitting at a desk, just plugging in. Also just the neocortex, not even, just the logical part of our brain, not what Greg Cajete calls the metaphoric part of our brain. And that brings in art and poetry and music and dreams and imagination. So that is I think that's more important to humanity right now than technology. Right. Personally, I really do. Even Einstein said imagination is more important than knowledge. Right. We got to always keep listening, with that beautiful Janine Benyus quote, wherever you are, hi, thank you for being here. And to listen really in full humility and listening to the land. And that's TEK. It's listening to the land and indigenous peoples who for generations and generations have been listening to the songs of the land and the mountains and the rivers and the forests and the deserts for, thousands of years. That's science, that's observation, that's participation in those natural processes that gives a different way of interacting with everything.
Yes. I have a couple more questions for you, Melissa, and I do want to leave some time open for some questions from the group that's gathered here. But just about this book, this has been a long journey for you. You told me when we spoke last week that you were asked in 2012 by the Cambridge Press folks to put together an anthology of traditional ecological knowledge. And that was before people were really even using this term, at least in the circles that I walk in. It was quite a while ago. And then that was a journey of many years. It was published in fall of 2018, so almost 2 years ago. And now, as our current conversations in the culture have turned so strongly to looking at decolonization and to tapping into different ways of knowing, I'm wondering what you might have to say about the timeliness of this book in 2021.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's long overdue, but better late than never. 30 years ago, like I said, when I was studying, biology and Native American knowledge, people thought I was schizophrenic or something. Like, what do those have to do with each other? People didn't believe it. But when I talked to my elders, people have been working on this for hundreds of years. I do say I'm a good listener, right? I try to listen well. So none of this is my teachings. This is just, I've just learned, I stand on the shoulders of my teachers and my elders. And it's, people like Robin Kimmerer and Dennis Martinez were publishing about TEK in scientific journals, 30 years ago, and Enrique Salmon. So they are really the, I don't like the word pioneers, the pioneers of creating a space in higher education and academia to talk about native sciences and traditional ecological knowledge. So they've been my mentors and I've been standing on their shoulders. And then of course, people on the ground have just been doing it without fanfare, without, media or publications. They've just been doing it, continuing to be caretakers, water keepers of their water, of their rivers, of their salmon, of their totem animals, of their sacred plants, of the holy forests and the springs. So people have just been doing it on the ground and it's now getting recognized and they're kind of like, duh, right? So I'm happy that it's happening now. But again, I think it really requires a reckoning with the past. To do it in a rightful way, to do it in a proper way, because you can't just move on, right? You can't just say, oh, let's just take a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and move forward. And, let's forget the past. Why do you always bring that up? It's like, no, we have to bring it up because of the profound injustices that have happened, need to be repaired and need to be discussed. There's so many dirty little secrets in this country about its origins that is coming out now. So, we thought 2012 was a cosmic number. We thought 2001 Space Odyssey was a cosmic number. Now we're in 2021. Now, if that isn't a cosmic number and time for some change, I think it is time. Mother Earth is screaming to us with climate change, with the fires, with the floods, with the droughts, with climate change. Indigenous peoples of color who have suffered disproportionately for centuries with environmental injustices are screaming and saying, come on, wake up, people. We've got to make some changes here. So I think it is absolutely time. And I think a lot of, Western scientists and, capitalists and folks are like, do we have all the answers? I don't think so. Climate scientists are kind of like, I don't know if we've got this all figured out quite yet. We should look and talk to people who have, longer term research than we have in understanding how climate changes in different, regions and ecosystems, and how plants migrate over generations. So I think it's absolutely time that we embrace and understand and respect indigenous knowledge systems in a new way, and work towards some kind of knowledge reconciliation moving forward.
Beautiful. And I'm wondering if the new book that you just sent me a quick text about before we started might have something to do with that. What is it called? How to be a good ancestor?
Yes, yes, the Center for the Study of Nature and People, my good colleagues there started asking this question through a wonderful conference we had here in Point Reyes called The Geography of Hope, and asking how, what does it mean to be a good ancestor? How do you want to be a good ancestor? And it's something that Indigenous peoples ask all the time through our rites of passage and the medicine wheel and the concept of the 7 generations before us and after us and our role in that cycle of life. How do we want to be a good ancestor? And so we started asking people that and getting such wonderful, wildly different responses that we, put it together in this fabulous collection of book that you can order now, but it won't be out for a couple more months, I think. By Chicago University Press, and the voices, I did the section that's primarily Indigenous youth voices, but there's Indigenous voices throughout the whole volume, but people from every walk of life, from youth to elders, every different cultural, ethnic background, workers in the fields, lay folks, scientists, award-winning authors, and every chapter has poetry, essay, and interview. So it's multimodality. When we talk about diversity of ways of knowing, it's, cognitive diversity. People like to read poetry, essay, or interviews. So the book really models a different way of thinking and thinking about what is our legacy? What kind of ancestor do we want to be? How do we want to leave the world? What world did we inherit, and what world are we leaving for the future generations, for our children and our children's children? So those are the questions that so many people grapple with in there, and it's a really fun, great read. So I hope you guys check that one out as well.
Thank you. And I think Jennifer just put that link for that book that you can pre-order in the chat. So look in the chat to find that. We'll also keep putting the links to order the Traditional Ecological Knowledge book, which I think Jennifer has a link from bookshop.org to be able to order that. You can also, I think it's on Amazon, but we like to go in more social justice avenues. And the other book that we will be putting a link up for is your earlier book about original instructions. Can you tell us just a little bit about that book?
Yes, that was a wonderful project that came out of Bioneers Network. And I always think of you in Santa Fe, Toby, with Bioneers, with Kenny and Nina, and the wonderful Bioneers Network and community that I've been a part of for, gosh, like going on 30 years. And in the early days, Kenny and Nina always invited fabulous elders like John Mohawk and Chief Warren Lyons and Jeanette Armstrong to be speakers. And over time, I and the Cultural Conservancy expanded to an Indigenous tent, an Indigenous forum. And now Cara Romero and others have expanded it. So we basically transcribed a lot of those early oral presentations by wonderful Native leaders. Many of them have passed on now. The late, great John Trudell, the Lakota poet. Also Paula Gunn Allen, the Laguna Pueblo Lakota academic author. And so many great people in that collection. And they're short chapters, very non-academic, beautiful, profound teachings, original instructions, sustainable teachings for the future. And I can't remember the publisher right now, but you can get it at Bioneers, and all proceeds go to Bioneers, which is really great.
Okay, great. So we put up the link for Amazon because that was the only place that we could find it immediately, but it looks like you can get it on Bioneers as well.
Yeah.
Melissa, I really see how you are that honeybee. You bring together circles of wisdom to cross-pollinate and present as a unified whole with distinct voices that each bring their own merits and their own wisdom. It's really quite a theme in the purpose of your life. We have about 10 minutes left, and I want to be sure to have some opportunity for people in this community to ask any questions that they want to, which you're welcome to do either by writing into the chat or by unmuting yourself. And you can raise your hand. There's a place, I think it's, you have an option. If you open participants, you have an option there to raise your hand, and we'll see your hand raised. Or you can write something in the chat with a question. And I can't see everybody, so you can't just nod and wave your hand, although I might catch you doing that. Does anybody have a question for Melissa? Oh, I see Sarah.
Or
in the
a
chat.
comment.
Or a comment.
Or a
Something you'd like to share, something you'd like to add to the conversation. If not, I've got more, but I have a feeling that there's some.
Come on. Hecklers.
I have one.
Great. And Marcia.
I'm
Welcome,
dear.
Marcia.
Hi, Sister Marcia. So good to see you.
Good to see you too. I'm kind of questioning where you think the horizon for tech is going. What do you see on the horizon for tech?
Well, TEK is our, our acronym, TEK, Traditional Ecological Knowledge. I think that we need to take advantage of this opening in mainstream society, whether it's universities, like where I was just hired at Arizona State University. It also helped actually with the publishing of this book. They have a relationship with Cambridge University Press. And Deb Haaland being selected as our Secretary of the Interior, the first Native woman to be in the cabinet at that level, managing our native lands, also known as, public lands and government lands. So I think we needed to really take advantage of this opportunity. I also just published a short piece in Sierra Club magazine, Time to Indigenize Land and Water Conservation. So I think, all the authors in this book, which there are 14, and many people on this call like yourself, Marcia, are pushing the envelope in Western sciences and in universities, in nonprofits, in public policy, in climate change mitigation and adaptation, in fire remediation and prevention. I think the horizon, the future of TEK is bright with strong Native leaders and more mentorship of young people who want to learn and keep promoting this and moving it forward and honoring the wisdom of our elders who have these long-term memories and histories and languages. We need to really honor that and move it forward in every sector of society. So I'm very hopeful to keep it moving forward slowly but surely, because again, there's ethical and historical and justice issues that need to always be part of the conversation. But I'm just delighted to hear that, land trusts, really mainstream, like white land trusts, are being like, hey, how did we get all this land? Why did we purchase all this land? There's a local tribe here that has no land, no food security. And this is where they traditionally hunted and gathered their, medicines. We should do a partnership. So I just also had to talk with the Nature Conservancy about this. So when you see groups like Sierra Club and Nature Conservancy and the Department of the Interior starting to talk about traditional ecological knowledge, and you have a lot of young people really passionate and excited to study it and get hands-on skills on the ground with it, I think the future is bright.
Thank you. You addressed the point I was worried about, which is IRP. The intellectual property rights.
Yes.
Ever since Guatemala, when I presented on that too. I've been really worried about it.
Absolutely. Honoring cultural privacy, intellectual property rights and decolonizing this conquest, this idea of always exploiting and extracting knowledge from people and tribes. That's got to end. It's got to be partnership. You have to come offering, right? When you go to someone's house for the first time, you offer something. You don't just come and feed me and mess up the bed and mess up the house and leave the garbage full. You come with a gift, right? You want to leave the place better than when you arrived. You know, that kind of partnership, I think, is that spirit that you enter these relationships with. So thank you for that, Marcia.
Thank
And
you,
as
Marcia.
and always keeping the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. If you don't know this document, Indigenous peoples worked for 40 years to finally get it ratified and approved in 2007. The UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples really codifies, if you can, what we would call universal Indigenous rights and values. So there's protections there for knowledge and ways to enter these relationships in a good way.
Thank you. I see a couple questions in the chat and Margie has a hand up. I just want to insert one. Maybe you can speak very briefly, Melissa, since there are many folks on this call who are interested in biomimicry and come from the biomimicry world, and you're talking about partnership. And I know that you and Dana Baumeister, who are both now at ASU, have been in some conversation about a meeting between your work around traditional ecological knowledge and biomimicry. Can you say just a little bit about what you're cooking up there?
Yes, well, we want to, we've applied for a couple of small grants to basically have listening sessions with the local tribes in Arizona to really see how they envision the work of TEK or their own traditional knowledge and the work of biomimicry coming together and increasing literacy in the sciences, both indigenous sciences and Western sciences. So there's lots more to say, but yeah, we're looking at collaborating around that because I see so many incredible women like yourself, Toby and Janine and Dana, a lot of women promoting biomimicry as a way to really feminize and get to the spirit of biology and the spirit of our relationship to nature from your own perspectives. I find it inspiring. I think there's some good linkages and some good reciprocity there. And again, moving slowly and surely to have these important conversations.
Good, thank you. I see Margie has her hand up. We have just a couple of minutes left. I'm happy to keep this platform open longer. I don't know, Melissa, what your schedule is like, if you could stay a few minutes afterwards for additional questions. But let's hear from Margie, and then at 2, we will officially close. At the top of the hour, we will officially close, and then if people want to stay, we'll take some more questions from the chat. Margie, could you unmute yourself and maybe can we see you too?
No, given where I am, you can't. Anyway, I want to just start by first just thank you, Melissa, and thank you, Toby. That said, and you have answered some of my questions, but I want to know, is there some kind of a roadmap so we stay on the path and don't do cultural appropriation? Are there things we need to look at so that we know, oh, we're falling off the path here? Like points, you know?
Yeah, good question.
Great question. Another group I'm happy to work with sometimes or often is the International Funders for Indigenous Peoples, IFIP, based here in San Francisco. And they have like the 4 R's of building partnerships with Indigenous peoples. You know, it's like respect, reciprocity, I don't know, help me with someone else on there, but restoration, renewal, reverence, really
responsibility, I think.
Responsibility. Hey, Jessica, great. I thought I saw you on the responsibility. I think those R's, you can look at IFOP website, I'm happy to give them to you, are so important. You come respectfully, reverentially, with reciprocity, not with a begging bowl. You come offering something. Hey, I know GIS mapping. Awesome. Hey, I know how to fundraise. Great. Hey, I know how to put on events. Wonderful. Hey, I know Zoom technology. You need a Zoom account. You need Zoom training. Like coming with something to offer. I have a farm. I produce, organic food. You need some food. You need land to grow your own native seeds. So there's many different ways to offer your skills. I think that's very important. And just keep an internal barometer of like, am I taking more than I'm giving? Or am I giving as much as I'm receiving, right? And even remove that word take. I learned long ago from Otis Parrish, an amazing Kushaya Pomo elder. He said, there's no word for take in their language. It's always give and be given. The emphasis, getting back to Robin Kimmer, is always on the gift. Life is a gift. When we give to each other, it's a gift. We don't take from each other. You give and be given. And so there's a ineffable and yet quite tangible quality of when you have the hum and the flow of that harmony happening. And there's pretty clear signs. You have to trust your intuition. Hawaiians called na'au, your gut feelings, right? You get feelings when people are giving you the eye. Thinking of the future vice president at some of the debates, it's like, I'm not sure about that. You get a feeling when people are feeling a little exploited or used or uncomfortable or uneasy, and just say, hey, is this good? Like, good communications is always key too. Really good communications. Yeah.
Thank you,
Great
Melissa.
question. Yeah.
Friends, we are at the top of the hour. I know a lot of folks need to jump, so we will continue this conversation for those who can stay, but I just want to really thank you, Melissa, for giving of your heart and your soul and your intelligence and your perspective and your values so deeply. For everybody who's come. We've had many, many people on this call today from lots of different networks and lots of different communities. And a big part of what Biomimicry for Social Innovation is about is connecting the network to more of itself and connecting those people who want to learn from and with the natural world, and those teachers speaking on behalf of the natural world. So thank you for participating in that. Please do buy Melissa's books. It's how we keep this whole thing moving. Reciprocity of support and sharing. Full disclosure, this book is not cheap. This book is about $100 ish.
Sorry, not my decision.
But it's something you're going to want to have on your bookshelf. Maybe we can also explore the possibility of buying and sharing, buying and passing, having book reading groups. I will offer to, if it's okay with you, Melissa, to scan and send a PDF of your chapter as a follow-up to this call. And your chapter is also a bit of a preview of the rest of the book. So if you're thinking, do I want to buy that book? You'll get a sense of what you are investing in. Is that okay with you, Melissa, if I send some of those pages? And the other books are a little bit more affordable. The most important thing is to carry what you've learned in your heart and share that, particularly all those R's. I think those R's are good values practice anyway.
They are.
So I'm seeing some things. People are wanting to arrange to have a signed copy from you, Melissa. I've seen some things in the chat about folks wanting to know if they can tune into your classes in any way, or any of your classes available, either through the university or in other ways. Can you speak to that?
Yes, not currently, not this spring semester, but hopefully next fall semester. So stay tuned. You can also check out the nativeland.org website, the Cultural Conservancy. We do a lot of educational events where you can also get really both hands-on and other teachings around this via Zoom, wherever you are in the world. And then my ASU site. So yes, there are ways that we can keep interacting and being in community. And I'm so grateful for all the awesome questions and observations.
And maybe if you can, Melissa, can you stay for another 10 minutes or so?
I'm happy to stay. And I've just seen and heard from old friends I haven't seen in forever and heard from. So thank you for all the yeah, the comments that I've just started to look at. Yeah.
And then it's fun for you, Melissa, to do the little arrows that take you to different screens and see people. Like there's Katie Sheen. I haven't seen you in a while. Hi, Katie. And there's Deb and just
Hey,
there's
Toad.
Pearl. I
Hey,
think Pearl,
Maxine and
Pearl
Deb
had a-
Perry and yeah, and Sarah was there and Pearl and Christine. Oh my goodness, yes, it's so great to see and hear you all. I'm
Melissa,
around.
here's a question from Pearl Gottschalk, who is on this call. We don't see you, Pearl, but we see your name.
Hi,
Are there resources for practical implementation of traditional ecological knowledge in land projects that can be actively implemented for landowners, land trusts, etc., as there's often a gap in that understanding, implementation, and connection to local tribes? Do you know of anything out there that can help non-native land trusts, landowners know how to practice this in a practical way?
Yes, I wish there was one centralized kind of place for a lot of this, dear Pearl, and maybe that's something, you know, Cultural Conservancy and other orgs need to focus on. Certainly the Indigenous Environmental Network has some really excellent resources. They're looking at Indigenous principles in just transition movement, which is slightly different, but also deeply related. Also, Robin Kimmerer's academic site at SUNY Syracuse and the center she put together, the Center for the Study of Native Peoples and the Environment out of SUNY Syracuse, and sowing synergy between Western and Indigenous knowledge systems. And she's got some great case studies and models there. I know in the old days, Society for Ecological Restoration, where Dennis Martinez has served as a board member off and on for decades. Society for Ecological Restoration was one of the first mainstream kind of science associations that strongly supported and invested in uplifting traditional ecological knowledge. And they have some great resources on their website for really pragmatic, like land restoration work. And then there is a growing native land trust movement. And it's underway to have like a parallel Native Land Trust Alliance, like the Land Trust Alliance, LTA, that many of us have been to their conferences. That's where I early on learned tools and skills from land trusts, and then really brought Native people to that forum to really highlight and talk about TEK. So the land trust movement is definitely involved with some of that. That brings me to Elizabeth Middleton's great book, Trust in the Land, about the Native Land Trust movement in its early years. And now they've really taken off with the land rematriation movement. I'm a proud founding board member of Segurite Land Trust here in the Bay Area, the first urban Indigenous women-led land trust. So our website, that website's just been kind of refreshed with some great skills and tools there. They have something called the Shuumi tax, which is a voluntary tax service for settlers who want to contribute and donate some kind of voluntary reparations to give back to the first peoples of the land. And it's so widely successful that many other tribes are using it around the country now. And Native communities, this voluntary tax to give back. If your family lived on some lands for, 50 years, 100 years, the tax goes to the government, but have you ever thought of the first peoples who actually took care of that land for thousands of years? And they, here in California, they never had a treaty. They never had a reservation. They're unrecognized. So that's been a really exciting new model. So
Melissa, maybe I'm going to interrupt you just for a second, because I think you're pointing to something that maybe people would like to hear the story about. In fact, I see in the chat. Tell us about Heron Shadow. Tell us a little bit about the story. Heron Shadow is the land, the farm that the Cultural Conservancy is now stewarding. And there's a great story about this land being returned to Native ownership. Maybe you can share that with the group.
Absolutely. And that old saying, be careful what you ask for. I was actually at a wonderful workshop in Hawaii on the Big Island at the Kohala Center, and they were just given a huge, amazing property that goes from the mountains to the ocean, like their traditional ahupua'a, with traditional agricultural lands, and they're restoring it. And I was like, oh my goodness, wouldn't it be amazing if someone wanted to give the Cultural Conservancy some land? Like, we're ready now. We've always advocated for tribes to get their own land back, but we never received our own. I don't know if we are ready, quite honestly. And then I come back to California and come back to the Bay Area. And like 2 months later, I get a call from this lady and she's like, I've done a national search for a Native organization to give my farm back to in Sonoma County, and everyone says I should talk to you. And I was like, oh my goodness, yes. I just said yes. And little did I know the complexities. Long story short, about 3 years later, many lawyers, many surveyors, not lawyers because of disputes, just there was a lot of complications with this property. But we were able to finally purchase the land at half price. So it wasn't an outright gift, but it was a reduced price. Almost 8 acres in Coast Miwok, Southern Pomo territory, near Sebastopol. Beautiful Green Valley watershed. They're restoring coho salmon in the area. Beautiful, silky, golden loams, sandy soils. And that's great for grapes, but great for some foods too. So the Cultural Conservancy has been having listening to the land workshops there for almost 2 years with local elders. The first thing we do, listen to the land before we did anything. Spend some time there and bring Native community, local Native community there, as well as international Native community. We've had people from all over the world come and visit before COVID hit. And we just said, what do you see and hear here? And we've been doing a master planning process also with the Occidental Arts and Ecology Center with the Great Rock Dolmen and their OAEC permaculture course. So another area where we're bringing together Indigenous planning in TEK, and permaculture, and looking at that relationship as well, much like we are with biomimicry. And it's very exciting. So then COVID hit, but it's a great place to meet outdoors. So we did meet outdoors for a while under the beautiful apple orchard and black walnut orchard. And we just had our first cultural burn about 3 weeks ago, traditional fire management, and we burned the field with prayer and offerings, and it was just lovely, right in between our first fall winter rains, and it just cleaned the land of a lot of exotic invasive grasses and is replenishing the soil, and the birds came to dance in the ashes, and hawks were flying over, and it was like a renewal of the land and a renewal of our marriage to that land. And so I can't wait to invite you all there. A biocultural heritage oasis led and governed by Indigenous, an intertribal, Indigenous group, and it'll be a learning center. And we're going to be growing a lot of great food there. So stay tuned through the Cultural Conservancy website at nativeland.org.
Beautiful, thank you.
Thank you for inviting that story. We're so excited about it.
Couple more questions. I'm not sure if these folks are still on. I think John Bayberry is still on, and he asked, here's a very practical question. Can you speak to how to best have a city council start meetings with a recognition of territory?
Hey, John. John and I have done canoe work together up at Lake Tahoe. Hey, John.
Hi.
Hey, good to hear you.
Things are changing here in Tahoe. There's a huge political shift and an awareness, and I'm bringing some art projects, public art projects to our community for Washoe recognition. But city council members asked, or actually I kind of prodded them, and they said, yeah, how do you go about doing that anyways?
Bringing more awareness, or actually leaders?
No. You know, like an introduction of the city council meeting being a territory recognition. And I told them I think it's really, really important. It's part of a healing process to say, you know, this is where our city is now. We recognize this as whatever tribe's territory and so on.
Yeah, well, you have an ear. Do you have an ear on the city council? It starts with that.
Yeah,
It starts with, a petition or a letter campaign. Politicians are supposed to listen to their constituency, right? I heard that somewhere. And so I think it would be great to mobilize your community there, your neighborhoods, and get sign some petitions. Marcia Small on this call, she started the first Indigenous Peoples Day event in, oh gosh, Bozeman, Marcia? Yeah, in Bozeman. And she's a great organizer from the grassroots who helped make that happen. And you have an ear on the council, so just start pushing it. I could email me about it, John, and I could send you some resources. Yeah.
great. It's going to happen. They were mostly asking, like it was that verbs and nouns things you were talking about earlier, the Western attitude versus. So we'll be speaking.
Yes, yes, exactly. And then as a lot of universities are doing land acknowledgements in the US, which is so great, it's finally happening. Canada and New Zealand and Australia, they've been doing this for so long. It's land acknowledgement. It's so important to always acknowledge the first peoples on whose land you are living or working or visiting. But it's also for people who are residents. What is the commitment to a relationship with the local peoples, right? Because if it's just like, oh yeah, I'm on the Coast Miwok land here, that's good, I said it, now I can move on business as usual. That doesn't really do any good for the local Native people. Yes, they don't want to be forgotten, they want to be remembered, they want to be acknowledged, but they also need partnerships. So I think that's the most important part of land acknowledgement with the city council, and not everyone's ready for that yet, but it's a first step in the right direction.
And Melissa, there's one more question for you here. I think that Kathy Jordan had to leave the call, but you told me this question would come, so I'm going to read it, and because I think maybe others might be holding it too. She asked, how have you maintained hope over these past few years? And she writes, how have you maintained hope as so much progress in protecting the earth has been reversed? The earth continues to warm and relationships among people are fraught with conflict and prejudice. How have you maintained hope?
Well, I'm blessed to work with such amazing people. I mean, I am surrounded by, like all the contributors in this book are my community, the Cultural Conservancy community, the Sogorea Land Trust community, the Native Food Movement community, the Land Rematriation and Native Land Trust community. I'm about, pragmatic solutions, and, there's so much good that needs to be done. And I just keep focusing on small scale things that I can do every day with my own behavior, my own consumption patterns, my own well-being, and the land that I live on, giving thanks to the redwood trees and the creeks and the bay and the ocean. Mother Nature is always here, having clean air to breathe. After the fires here in California, many of you heard, we had about like 30, 40 days of horrific air, which, on the coast, you never think that's going to happen. It was so frightening. And I was taking fresh air for granted. I don't anymore. Right? I don't anymore. And so Mother Earth is trying to wake us up in many different ways. And that's really important. So young people who want to do good for the earth, they give me hope. All of you on the call give me hope. Seeing the hummingbirds pollinate, that gives me hope. I know life will continue. Life will continue on this planet in one way or another. Whether the human species continues, for how long, not so sure, but we've got to keep doing the good work, and honoring this sacred earth and honoring each other and all our relatives. So I have hard days. I have tough days too, where things just seem so dismal. But I have great hope in planting a seed You know, just planting good seeds is always a great way to give you hope.
Thank you, Melissa. Thank you so much. I think we're going to end on that note. That's a good note to complete on. There are some other questions in the chat. There's some folks who want to talk to you, Melissa, about maybe doing something in other parts of California that you're doing at Heron Shadow. Some people have asked me about being in touch with you directly. So we will share this chat record with you, Melissa.
Wonderful.
And it's also available. It's part of the recording that goes out to everybody who's on this call. And we will post this recording also on social media in a few days so that other people can get benefit from it too. But the whole chat record will come with the link that goes to the people who registered for this call. Jennifer asked me, can you confirm the recording will be emailed? It will. So everybody who's on this call who registered for this call will get a copy of this link. You'll also get, it might take a couple of days to get all this together, but you will get remember the old days? Some of you who are old like me, when we went to college, there were those photocopied, scanned versions of books that were in our readers. It's going to be something like that through my iPhone about Melissa's chapter, which she so generously shared. And we'll also be telling you about future authors, women authors who are putting forth the voice of the natural world, who might come and be in this circle with us. I have great gratitude to everybody who's come, the 60, 70, maybe 80 people who are on this call today, and the nearly 200 who registered. If you're watching the recording, thank you to you too. And excuse my eyes wavering, I'm getting texts and chats and all kinds of things happening. But I just want to remember that these kinds of conversations, this conversation, this circle, and all the people that we touch, and the ways that we care for the earth are alive and well, even in times where our world seems so crazy. The light shines even brighter in these times when we have big questions about that. So thank you for being part of this. Again, Melissa, thank you so much. I just love you. I'm so grateful for our banana slug dance that we've been doing together for decades now.
Love you, Toby, and thank you all. Such an honor and treat to be with you and see you and hear you and think together. And please keep in touch through the Cultural Conservancy at nativeland.org or my ASU School of Sustainability website and email. But I'm really buoyed by your spirits and the work that you all do. So thank you, Toby and Jennifer and your whole community for making this happen to be here.
Thank you.
Miigwech, as we say. Thank you.
Miigwech. Spread the love, folks. Go pass it around. May all of this take root through your ongoing circles and sharing.
Plant your good seeds. Plant your good seeds. Yeah. All right. Thank you. Take care.